Well, I asked, where's the beef? Let's call this for what this is. Oh my God! They are so hopelessly woke. How dare you? That is the intellectual capital of the left today. Give me a break. You are now watching the Daily Roundup.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Roundup. Today, we're going to be chatting about Justin Trudeau crashing the Calgary Stampede, the Liberals' lavish spending, and an indie film out performing Indiana Jones of all things. I'm sure the folks at Disney are not too pleased about that. Before I get into some of the nuts and bolts, very pleased to be joined by my co-host for the day, Drea. Drea, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Good to see you again and be back with the people for the Daily Roundup.
That's awesome. It's fun. So, folks, you're probably joining us on one of these platforms. Otherwise, let me know because I'll be surprised. Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, Getter, or otherwise, if you subscribe to us on Locals, you might be getting to our stream through there, and that's a great way to support us and access some other sort of local content. I do want to encourage you, if you are one of the folks watching on YouTube, folks seem to be switching over to the sort of free speech oriented platforms like Rumble. We tend to get more viewership there. The reason that matters is because we don't want a platform that dictates what you think or what you say or how you have to think. The internet, this platform, despite what Justin Trudeau might say, is supposed to allow all people, as long as they're sort of being respectful, not violating any laws, to share their opinions, and platforms like Rumble, they do just that. So consider switching over there. The other really fun thing about a platform like Rumble is there's a thing called Rumble Rants. You chip in a few bucks, and then you can actually engage with us, unlike the sort of disconnected liberal media or mainstream media that takes money from your taxes and you get virtually no feedback. The only person giving them feedback is their handlers, and that's probably some of Justin Trudeau's staffs. We have the opportunity to actually engage with you, talk about some of these stories. So as the stories are coming in, if you're on Rumble, consider weighing in. We'd like to engage with that. One of my favorite parts is towards the end of the show, and we get to engage with that. It's also a way that we get to know which stories matter most to you, and then we can be sure to cover more of that type of content in streams moving forward. So on that note, we're going to start our day off, given that I'm in Calgary, talking about Calgary. And before we get into the news, though, I just want to say congratulations to Kian Simone, our chief documentarian. We had 2 sold-out screenings in Calgary for this incredible documentary, Church Under Fire. Tamara Leach was there last night signing books. I was bouncing the line, so to speak, and I think a couple hundred people got books signed. I took many pictures. It was a great night. If you missed our world premiere, there is a report on that out right now, so you can check that out. But there are screenings right across this country. So go to savethechristians.com and grab some tickets. Check that out. Let's make sure all of these events sold out. Ezra Levant last night and the night before said that this is the best thing that Rebel News has ever produced. I agree. It looks absolutely incredible. And we've had some incredibly strong films, your own coverage of the residential schools included. So we have some strong projects. So that is quite the endorsement. Be sure to go check this out. In other Calgary news beyond those incredible screenings, I want to talk Calgary Stampede with you a little bit, Drea. Drea, have you had a chance to come out to the Calgary Stampede?
I have never been there, but I want to go as long as the premier isn't too close. Did he wear that horrible cowboy hat? Or not the premier, the prime minister, I meant to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, Notley wore a cowboy hat backwards. So it's the former premier wearing hats backwards, or the prime minister. Yeah, it's something else, and we're referring to it as him crashing the Stampede. It's about as inorganic as anything. Before we get into some of the sort of political stories, and Stampede is undeniably a political season. For those unfamiliar with the Stampede, it's one of the biggest rodeos. It's rodeos that cowboys all over the world look forward to. Some of the most money that can be made by cowboys. But beyond that, there's giant concert tents. There's a free outdoor stage. The entire city sort of transformed. Anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 million people come through the Stampede grounds. And with international travel returning this year, they're expecting it's going to be a record year. With that, all those people available, you will see Pierre Poilievre, Justin Trudeau, all the premiers, all the politicians, everything, having Stampede breakfasts, which is effectively, if you drive in any direction during Stampede for 10 minutes, there's going to be free pancakes somewhere. That's pretty much what the city looks like during Stampede. And often it's politicians giving away these free pancakes, trying to lure you in. There's also an opportunity for often politicians to come together and meet and all that. We're going to get into that for a second. But before that, I kind of want to address the sort of, there's a divide. Even last night talking to some people, there's a bit of a flood here in Calgary. People were saying like, oh, if the Stampede grounds were to flood, that wouldn't be the end of the world. You know, part of the Stampede is sort of debauchery and partying, and there is all that to
Right.
it. But I've had the opportunity to do some reports in the past. And if that's all you're paying attention to, you're sort of missing the core of it. This is a well over 100-year-old celebration of sort of Western culture, values, cowboy culture, the sort of building blocks of this country that helped establish the West and Canada at large. So I'm actually a big fan of the Calgary Stampede, maybe not sort of some of the modern iterations of it, but the Stampede at its core. From someone who hasn't been at the Stampede before, what's your sort of first impression of it? What do you hear about the Calgary Stampede?
Definitely you see the party aspect of it, but I think you can tell that there's more to it than that. It's history. People seem proud to be out there. I was born in Alberta, but for some reason I never went out there. But it's kind of one of those sort of trademark things that people do. And no, it shouldn't be flooded. Like I said, right now, there is definitely more attention of the political side, how the politicians sort of capitalize on it when they come out. And it's interesting to see, Trudeau tends to roll his sleeves up when he's around the working men, and then he gets there in his cowboy hat and his belt. I don't know all the fashion, how you're supposed to dress with it, but it's always awkward to see him in one of his many costumes. So, so it'll be interesting to see what happens this time around.
And it's absolutely a
There he
costume.
is.
It's funny at the recent report last week. I was at the Ponoka Stampede for Canada Day, and it was funny. I couldn't get back in time, but they made me a dignitary, so I was gonna like ride the stagecoach through the like whole stadium, the massive audience there. But there's a rule where you need to wear a cowboy hat. So I basically like sprinted a couple clicks there and back to try and get back in time. I didn't make it back. So for a bunch of that report, I'm wearing a cowboy hat because I wasn't going to go back to my vehicle. I had a bunch of reports to do, and one hand's holding a camera, one hand's holding a mic. So I've got a cowboy hat on. But like, I do a bit of horseback riding. I've had the opportunity to go out with our friend Tarek, even a little bit of Western stuff. I've spent some time on a farm. I've grown up in Alberta, and even I'm like, have I quite earned the cowboy hat? Justin Trudeau has no shame, and he just puts on the costume, which, you know what? If you want to come down to Stampede, you're allowed to wear cowboy hat, boots, have fun.
For sure.
I'm not going to begrudge anybody, but he does kind of look like a kid dressing up there.
One of my favorite ads on Rebel News is your ad where you're on the horse and you're just doing it so gracefully. I think you definitely have earned your cowboy status. That is such a classic Rebel. I remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, is Adam really on a horse right now? Was it a report or an ad? But that was good.
Yeah, it was. Well, so Tarek and I have done a full interview on horseback.
Nice.
Brian Jean may have also gone out horseback riding with us, maybe. But we've had the opportunity to do a few things on horseback. So yeah, we did a full one with Tarek and I. We're riding and talking. So yeah, maybe I've earned my chops. We'll see.
What are they expected to discuss when they meet, though, Trudeau and Smith?
I was going to say, speaking of Trudeau being a child, listen, folks in Canada are struggling. Inflation is booming. I wish I could say the economy's booming. It's doing okay in Alberta, actually, but overall, folks are struggling. It's difficult to make ends meet. And this government is driving that with inflation, with carbon taxing, with all this stuff. And when Justin Trudeau comes here, he's not talking about new business. He's not talking about anything else. What he wants to sit down with Danielle Smith and discuss is emission reductions. That is the most important topic here by far. Now, it's pretty interesting. Obviously, Danielle Smith has been sort of staunch and ardent defender of Alberta in pushing back against this. It's pretty interesting, though, because, and we're going to have a clip here, and this is, I believe, from last year's Stampede during the leadership debates. And I actually asked Danielle Smith, like, for most of us in Alberta, it's like, why talk about 2050? Why are we using the rhetoric of progressives? And if we have that clip, we can jump to that clip, and then we can discuss a little bit, because that is going to feed into the conversation that likely takes place with Justin Trudeau and Danielle Smith today.
Advocating for freedom, espousing for Alberta sovereignty. Many were shocked to hear you speak in favor of net zero. Net zero for many is a Paris Agreement buzzword. often one that's pushed by progressives. How do you justify employing that language when running for the leader of a conservative oil-rich province?
The industry is using that language. There's about 90% of our energy companies who have set an aggressive target using that language. We have companies like Air Products and Dow Chemical that are announcing that they're investing here with that as their target. So I think it's our job to support industry rather than fight against them. I think that what I'm seeing is that there's a huge amount of investment in technology. We are world leaders, and the Ottawa elites don't seem to understand this. We are world elites in carbon capture, in developing the hydrogen economy. We are going to be at the forefront of that. And I believe that by exporting dramatically more LNG, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and all other pollutants around the world. So I see that the industry is embracing the challenge, and they're doing it in a way that is going to make sure that our industry grows and our revenues grow and our jobs grow. So I support that.
So now, do you find, I get playing ball and trying to go along with the industry, but do you believe that employing the language of radical environmentalists, even if the industry is doing it, participating in carbon scheme, is in a way, whether it's direct or tacit, sort of ramping up this broader eco language and broadening outreach for groups like the World Economic Forum that use the exact same language?
I guess it's been fairly routine to have that language. I've been in business advocacy for 2 years, and it's fairly routine for business advocates to be using that term. Part of the problem that we're facing is that the divestment movement has been targeting our industry, and our industry has had to demonstrate that they have good environmental standards, good social standards, good governance factors, and those are the things that that industry is doing to attract capital here. So that's the most important thing, is to make sure that capital gets attracted. I agree with you. I'm trying to use these hypercharged language. Maybe we shouldn't use them, but the goal of reducing emissions and the goal of being able to demonstrate that we're environmentally responsible, everybody's on board with that.
So, and just a really quick follow-up, are countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela playing those same games when they sell oil?
They have government-owned industries, and so they have their own ability to finance themselves. And that's part of the reason we've got to look at how we can be more self-sufficient. If we can repatriate our Alberta pension plan, maybe we can support our industry here with our own dollars. As long as we remain reliant on the international community for investment dollars, the industry...
Yeah, so that was kind of the part I wanted to touch on there. One thing that I do really like about Danielle Smith compared to other politicians is like she knows she's on camera. And this kind of goes back to her time in radio, but she's like, maybe we shouldn't be using that language. I completely understand because of federal pressures. Like, I don't think these industries want to be playing these games. The OPEC distributors and some of these other distributors, they are not playing these games. I feel like companies in this country feel like they have to play ball with the federal government, and so they go along with this type of language. But I like that Danielle Smith there said, like, maybe we shouldn't. What's your perspective, though? Trudeau is setting this impossible 2030 deadline based on their numbers. I happen to look at the science and know that given the vast amount of trees and the very low level of population, and pollution in this country, we probably are something like net zero if you really want to look at that. And then Danielle Smith's 2050 deadline. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, it's always like, why is there so much focus on this area when there's other countries that are definitely doing way more when it comes to emissions? I like that Danielle Smith has a reasonable approach and answer. I like that she's answering questions from you, Rebel News. So that says a lot right there. But you're right. She seems really down to earth, and she also relates it to her experience. Like she says, she's been a part and realizes that language has been pretty common. But what's the root of the language? Why is that common? And that's what, people are too busy to kind of look into or think about. But really, that's my issue with 2030. Why is it 2030? Is it feasible? Yeah. Who wants it to be 2030? Is it a Canadian initiative? Is it a foreign initiative? And is it realistic for every province? And so she's right to say, everybody's in agreement to work towards this goal, but the hard, fast WEF 2030 and even 2050, I'm not a fan of.
Yeah, and for me, it is like language really matters. Obviously, we've got our new incredible edition of 1984 out, which maybe we can throw the URL up because I don't want to get it wrong. But I think it's just by 1984. the language matters so much. There's this sort of like sentiment of double speak
Mm-hmm.
and all this stuff. But the fact that this buzzword is continually being used, I wouldn't have a problem necessarily with, say, an incentive for companies that are reducing pollution, like a
Mm-hmm.
partial a break for companies that are making an effort to reduce pollution.
Yeah.
I think that's good. The government should be encouraging and incentivizing business, not punishing them. That would drive businesses to grow. It would enable businesses to hire more people because they're not paying that. And if you can save on taxes, you can do some of this other stuff. So there are ways to incentivize sort of positive environmentalism and bringing change. Conservatives tend to be the real conservationists. We're the ones who spend more time outside. We're the ones who sort of hunt and do all these things, and we're concerned about nature, not just living in downtown Calgary and putting up a sign about protect our parks that we never go to, but we actually live in it. So I think conservatives are in favor of environmentalism in the traditional sense. Every form of modern environmentalism being pushed by progressives and using this type of language, it always involves giving money to the government and surrendering our rights to the government.
Exactly.
Which
That's what it all comes.
Yeah,
it comes down to doing your part, which is also another term we heard get pushed and said simultaneously, by politicians. It's the same as the Build Back Better. They come up with these catchy slogans that almost lose the meaning of the cause. And you're right, the root of the cause behind them is in favor of the government over the people many times over and over.
Two things that I wanted to touch on now. Fortunately, bear with me as I pull that up, unless you happen to have it there. It's on the screen. There we go. I'll read straight from the screen. Yeah, wonderful. So this, again, as we're pulling that up, this is more news, and this is what we see under Danielle Smith. This is what we see under conservative governments in general. We saw so many, despite the fact that these places are saying they're playing these games, a government that is fundamentally for oil versus a government that is fundamentally against it, or a government that is pro-business versus anti-business, that will draw people in. And we saw so many headquarters leaving Calgary under the NDP government, and we're now seeing companies come back. And it's really interesting to see that Danielle Smith, while advocating for our oil, never apologizing for it, insisting she will push back against the federal government and rejecting any sort of cap on our productions as a cap on our wealth and prosperity. She has been sort of someone who uses this language of diversification and bringing in tech, and all that stuff is good. We can be Silicon Valley and oil country. We can be both of those things. In fact, that would be great if we could do both of those things, because there'd be even more prosperity. I think that this government is creating a habitat that is conducive to that. As someone from BC, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think it's important to speak the language, right? If you are doing, and I think she's actually really good at that in the policies that she's talking about. You can't totally just be one-sided, because there is diversity within your own province of Alberta. So it is good that she's using sort of the language that everybody can kind of get on board on, as long as it's reasonable. Now, I'm not surprised to hear that people are coming back to Calgary and that they had run away before. And I just can't help but think of what's going to happen in Toronto with the new leadership over there, if we're going to see anything like that. But traditionally, people want to go where there is, the hope, the dream of prosperity and success and, a good family life. And so that's what people are attracted for. And that's what Alberta has done very well at in the past.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Hopefully things continue. When we're at some of these events, for example, I'm going to be attending. We've got folks heading out to basically every stop in the city here. So we're going to have people at the Justin Trudeau events. We're going to have people at the, I think Pierre Poilievre is expected to be at an event as well. I'm going to be at the Premier's breakfast, as well as in another couple of events, speaking with Energy Minister Brian Jean next week as well. So we're going to be all over these stories. But one of the questions that I am actually hoping to ask the Premier, usually there's some media availability, sometimes they sneak out. I'm sure I'll be able to talk to some folks. And this may seem like we've just passed an election, but the question I want to ask her is what she believes a UCP led by Danielle Smith has to do to win the next election. Now, I know we're 4 years out and we just got past an election, but I think that's a critical issue, because all these campaign promises that got them elected, and I don't think they got the margins. They lost some critical seats in Calgary that I think they're going to have to win back. So I want to ask her plan for this party and for this province moving forward that can reestablish a conservative government, perhaps with some stronger holds in Calgary, and not see more slippage and see more of the country going orange. One of the things, or the province going orange rather, one of the things that she certainly garnered some support on, and critics will attempt to deride her. There was an article I think we talked about last week where they're saying, oh, one month is worse than overall recovery on addictions deaths. So this system's clearly failed. There's a categorical bias there. But I think that the Alberta model, the approach to addictions, is sort of the model for the country. The numbers seem to indicate that, but beyond that, just on an aspect of sort of basic human compassion and caring for people, helping people reclaim their lives is powerful. I'm going to be at another event, another Stampede breakfast. That is, we did a video on the Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center. We're going to be speaking to a whole bunch of youth who actually went through the program, are recovered addicts, and learn about their sort of experience. And how much it mattered that someone was there to support them. Another community that is very happy, and I've had the opportunity to speak with Chief Roy Whitney, but Chief Crowfoot has also been addressing this. And we actually have a clip. If we can jump to that Twitter clip that has Dan Williams, Danielle Smith, and Chief Crowfoot addressing this critical issue.
My question and my follow-up in the same question. Part of the Alberta approach is involuntary treatment. Here we're talking about holistic approach, an approach that includes traditional way of doing things to treat addiction. So I guess my question is for both Minister Williams and Chief Crowfoot, like how do you reconcile the two together? And would those facilities have involuntary treatment as well? And how does that approach fit with your community and the historical aspect of involuntary treatment and being put in facility without consent?
But in Siksika, our way is more extreme than what they're mentioning. Our way is to intervene. Our way is to, as a community raises a child. We're not raised to sit back and to let somebody self-destruct. Our ways are to pull them in and to say, you know what, Niskani, or, what's going on. So, our way is to intervene. If I had my son out doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing, I just can't just let him keep doing it. I have to pull him in and say, hey, what's going on? So that very well is our way, and I think we've gotten away from that as a society. I don't want to go too far down a philosophical standpoint here, but we've kind of, as a society, said, you know what, everybody can do what they want to do, and there's no accountability. And as a result of no accountability, there's no consequences. We live in a world of no consequences because nobody wants to be offended, and that's a problem. So at Siksika, we didn't worry about if Johnny was offended. We're worrying about, you know what, Johnny, you're disrupting yourself. We need to help you to help yourself.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. Round of applause.
Wow.
And I spoke with him. He wasn't coming on camera at the time there. And he was at the initial event during the campaign announcements, where they sort of broached this. Chief Roy Whitney, actually from Tsutina, he lost his son to suicide as a consequence of his addictions battle, and he says he wishes something like this would have been available. I love seeing Danielle Smith, First Nations communities, people like the Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center coming together and saying this is saving lives, plain and simple. Another announcement that also came out was they're actually making a 75-bed facility. Normally they're 50, 40 or smaller at Tsutina Nation as well. So that is a large facility. I believe, I'm going off the top of my head here, but it was like a $30 million investment. So that construction is going to start soon. This government has done more for First Nations communities, or is at least trying to, and is engaging with First Nations communities, despite all the media would have you believe that Danielle Smith is anti and she's killed these relationships. Well, I don't remember seeing this much engagement between First Nations communities and the premier of this province, other than sort of superficial event politicking. But this is real attainable action, and you can hear how passionate he is. He's sort of in this fight. I think this is so incredible, and to see people coming together regardless of backgrounds and saying, no, we're a community, we help each other. I think that's incredible.
Well, maybe that's going to be her answer to you on how she would win again, is just delivering on examples like that. And you're right. But that is back to the basis. He hit everything on the nail. Back to humanity. Stop politicizing literally every corner of society.
Yeah.
This is about saving lives, doing what works, and doing what's common sense. Obviously, this is the approach that needs to be taken. And so it's very encouraging to see that. Hopefully, BC could follow in footsteps. But it's almost like we're rolling out an experiment here, a social experiment. The better you guys consistently do, the harder it will be for other provinces, hopefully, to not fall in line.
Well, last night at the Church Under Fire event, we talked about the notion of leadership. And even during COVID-19, the country didn't have leadership. It was monkey see, monkey do. Everyone was just copying each other, following each other. When you ask them what the basis was for decisions, they're like, oh, well, Toronto did it. It's great to see actual leadership. There's some of it in Saskatchewan. There's some other places that are taking some stands on issues, whether it's firearms rights or other things, pushing back on carbon tax, things like that. But great to see some leadership in this country. We're way overdue for a commercial break. So without further ado, we'll talk to we'll jump to that. When we come back, we're going to talk about crime, lawlessness, all that sort of good stuff. So stay tuned.
In a world plagued by conformity, where truth is distorted, freedom is a distant memory, and Big Brother is always watching. One man, Winston Smith, looks to break through his bleak existence. Introducing the all-new Rebel Illustrated Classics edition of George Orwell's iconic book, 1984. Now, more than ever, in the age of lockdowns, 15-minute cities, and World Economic Forum globalism, everyone must read 1984. Uncover the hidden depths of this literary classic with our exclusive illustrated edition that brings Orwell's haunting vision to life, reborn with a foreword by Ezra Levant and 30 captivating new illustrations by artist Paul Ravoche.
You see that Orwell is not only explaining what might come, but in my opinion, what's already here, even back when he wrote it in 1949, but much more so as we see revealed today, particularly with the last 3 years.
Join the rebellion against conformity. Get your hands on the Rebel Illustrated Classics edition of 1984, now available at buy1984.com.
No matter what, God will bring us through, and I said, we will not bow down to your gods.
For tickets, showtime details, and to see the trailer, please go to SaveTheChristians.com.
There are so many great movies out right now. I think Disney lost like almost $1 billion on the last 10 releases or something like that. And lots of these things pushing sort of woke. Yeah, exactly. Go woke, go broke. Meanwhile, Church Under Fire is selling out. There's lots of other great events. If you can talk about like God's Not Dead, Unplanned, Jesus Revolution, and it's not the sort of. There was a time where you'd watch a Christian film, understanding it might be B grade because you wanted the moral content, so you'd sort of trade. That's sort of disappearing. This stuff is actually becoming like objectively good. I want to talk about one of the biggest films right now that just beat out Indiana Jones. Before I talk about that, I want to talk a movie that was just out recently, still probably potentially showing near you. It's going to be out soon, and that's the film Nefarious. Have you had a chance to check it out?
I was gonna say, yeah, we got to mention that. Yes, I did, and it was so good. And that's by the same people who produced Unplanned, which didn't even. It got into Canada through people, renting out theaters. But aside from that, according to the directors, they went all the way up to the top of our government and were rejected. So they said they didn't even bother really trying to get Nefarious across the board here because we're pretty much a communist country was one of their words. So pretty shocking, but very good. Did you see it? It's sort of a horror movie, a psychological thriller kind of thing.
I interviewed Sean Patrick Flannery yesterday.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Yeah, so the star of the show, parents don't take your kids to see it. It's horrifying. It's basically about possession and sort of the framing narrative The device is a very secular psychiatrist, is determining if someone on death row is fit to stand trial for execution. And the question quickly turns to whether or not this individual is possessed. Sean Patrick Flannery, who you may very likely recall from films like Boondock Saints or Powder, not the person depicted on the screen now, but the individual we'll see here very soon. If this weren't a sort of conservative film, he would win an Oscar or at least be nominated. His performance is exceptional. Yeah, so good. And this film is like anchored. I think Sean Patrick Flannery said that 85 out of 90 pages are this conversation sitting at a table. It's almost exclusively this conversation. If you like C.S. Lewis, the Screw Tape Letters, you'll love this. The writing is next level. It's as accurate as anything I've seen as far as sort of demonic-oriented films. Scary, don't bring your kids, not appropriate. But this is another film, and it's interesting, in our conversation, I asked if he knew this would rub people the wrong way. The potentially possessed character, the demon effectively, rejoices at things like abortion and euthanasia. It is such a condemnation of all these sacred cows in society, and to have it tackled so head on was I don't know, me and my wife were looking at each other like, oh my gosh, they did it. Yeah. What did you think? Like, what was that?
Good. And at the end, you're right, because all the scenes predominantly are in the same area. We're like, well, the budget was pretty good, but you cannot tell. The acting is phenomenal. Like you said, the writing, and when they hit Maid on there, I was like, wow, that is so good. And I wish it was more widespread. So you interviewed him, so I can't wait to see that. Is it making its way into Canada now somehow?
So theaters were showing it. Like, I saw it at a theater, and I know the owner, it was at the same theater that, thank God bless Kenny Meadows Cinemas, by the way. They've hosted so many of our premieres, almost all of them. They do bring in films like this. And some of the other theater chains, we need art. We need artists and art to stand up for freedom of expression. And these chains, they certainly may not agree with it. They don't necessarily espouse these perspectives, but they're like, no, art needs a place to be shown. So this film is certainly art. But let's talk about this film now, Sound of Freedom. This is blowing the doors off. This is getting into just about everywhere. A Jim Caviezel film, obviously. The story of basically an FBI agent who leaves that field in order to tackle human trafficking, particularly trafficking of children. An incredibly powerful story. I haven't seen this yet. I can't wait to go see it. I'm definitely going to. But it's doing incredibly well. And isn't this just such a strong repudiation? Far smaller budget than lots of these other movies,
right?
But it's talking about spiritual, social, and moral issues. Mainstream media, mainstream motion pictures won't touch on. That being said, I mean, the new Spider-Man movie does kind of dive into some of that stuff. Some of these major studios are realizing that the sort of woke thing isn't working. And I think if you have a director with artistic integrity who won't bend, there's still the occasional surprise out there. But people are clearly craving this. These films are becoming successes. There's a demand for it. How much of sort of a rejection of the left owning the media landscape, at least the motion picture landscape, do you think this is?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I love that it's such an underdog story. I can speak for the area here. There was barely any theaters that were screening it. And when they did, it was like Wednesday, one show, and I couldn't make it. And then now I look and it's like everywhere. It's done so good that every theater is like, oh, shoot, I guess we should have that here. So very exciting to see something that's shedding light on something so important, child sex slavery, something in society's shadows that definitely needs light on it. It's based on a true story. And I'm just so happy to see them doing well when they're this sort of B sort of thing. And it is a wake up call for, like you said, Disney keeps losing money. I remember there was some woke, I can't remember the name, but Netflix films that went out that totally failed as well. So to see something with such a good moral message and a good, strong reminder that we need to be aware and tackling the human trafficking issue. And again, based on a true story. I can't wait to see it. My mom saw it, and side note, someone stole her Cadillac converter in the parking lot.
Oh man.
Little side note, that keeps happening out in this area. But anyway, she's going
that
back
transitions into our next story. So
okay, yeah, there we go. She's seeing it a second time, and I will be seeing it as soon as I get a moment. It's good to support stuff like this, right? So that the theaters know we can't keep, ignoring people that don't fall in line with the woke agendas.
So priority, folks, go get your tickets for Church Under Fire. And then get your tickets for Nefarious if you can find a screening, because they did an interview with us. And then after those, get your tickets for Sound of Freedom. Make sure you see all those. There's your
you won't
homework
regret
for
it.
the week. Speaking of catalytic converters being stolen, the sort of rampant crime that we're seeing that would have shocked us. I don't know, maybe not in East Hastings, but I mean, growing up in Alberta, in most major cities in Canada, you really didn't see this stuff, like murder skyrocketing. All this stuff is just out of control. And then you have sort of these shocking videos becoming more and more common on social media. I don't know if we actually want to play this, if it's too brutal. If the studio wants to play it, they can. If not, I'll let them make that decision. But there's this sort of shocking video on the Toronto Transit. A fight erupting, and it turns into stabbings, and everyone's fleeing, and it's absolutely just horrific to see. Now, ultimately, I do think that this was a fight that turned into a stabbing.
For sure,
I don't think there's any sort of there we go. There isn't any sort of implication.
You don't see the stabbing in the video, but it's still disturbing. The audio is actually disturbing too.
Yeah.
Just hearing the guy scream. I don't know if we're gonna play it or not, but.
No, it's okay. We don't probably. Yeah, there we go.
Yes. Anyways, very disturbing, and I think we're starting over again. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking then.
Yeah, there's additional shots too of people from other angles who are sort of filming it, and they're like running, screaming. There's no one available. You know what? Things like this happen. They're happening on the increase. I think part of the reason they're happening on the increase is progressive politicians who are so soft on this, and that makes me sick. Don't get me wrong, but Olivia Chow's response to this is that it makes sense to add workers and guidance counselors to prevent future incidents. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's not merit. There's not merit. There's merit to helping people and creating community networks. But if your response, what are you trying to get a youth worker or guidance counselor stabbed? You need police at train stations and on trains and where rampant crime happens in these major cities because of soft policing and soft courts. Ultimately, often it isn't even the policing. People who are serial offenders, constantly getting into fights, doing drugs, breaking and entering, stealing stuff. They literally, and we talk about this almost every week, because these politicians, these progressive politicians, just do not learn. It's catch and release. The police bring them in, and then 15 minutes later, they're walking out of the station, and the police just get sick of this. So you can go to the sort of most violent, drug-ridden, rampant, terrible areas, and the police do nothing. I'm laughing. The other week we talked about how I was outside the public library, and they're like, "Oh, you can't have a tripod out here while people are doing hard drugs."
Yeah.
We've surrendered that. Oh well, some people are just going to be violent. Some people are just going to be doing drugs. That's just part of life now. I know here in Alberta, Danielle Smith has brought more sheriffs in. They're increasing policing and saying, "No, we're going to get hard on crime." I don't know. This is bad. I know parts of Vancouver are really bad. Is there any sort of effort in your neck of the woods to tackle this, or is it the same sort of progressive? Maybe we can hire another guidance counselor.
Well, I think that's so silly, especially for situations like this in particular. I do know that sometimes there are counselors that accompany police officers to certain calls, especially the certain types of calls, like if someone is suicidal and things like that, that makes sense. But when you're on public transit, I mean, a fight broke out. That's what happened. What on earth is a counselor going to do in that situation where it progressed from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds? Whether it be metal detectors, more police, what have you. As someone who has a teen who takes public transit, it is concerning for sure to see more of this happening. She's, of course, expressing concerns as well. And not just from what she's seeing on, but also what she's experiencing inside. There's been, just weird people getting angry and fighting with each other. And I keep saying it. I think we, as a society, as a much across the globe have been through trauma for what's happened to us. We've been pitted against each other. Families have split on each other. There's been so much turmoil, so much politicization from, you know, how COVID-19 was politicized, that I think we've been through trauma ourselves, and no one has, most people have not had a chance to heal from that. Everybody seems to be on edge. And then you have things like this. Last I heard, the suspect in this situation is still at large. He's described as a Black man between 25 and 30 years old. I see now the article here, they at least have a better picture of him, because the pictures before were not very good. So they've got a good picture of him. Hopefully they'll find him. Yeah, because that's pretty concerning that it just goes from that to stabbing. And the victim, I believe, survived his injuries.
Yeah, I think he made a sprint for it. I believe we actually do have that video of Olivia Chow sort of addressing this. So let's just see that response to. I mean, most of us are mortified. Let's see what her response is here.
To provide more safety situation, you know, for example, they have private security guards. They have they're looking at ways to have people support, like he talked about social workers in TDC to support people that have different issues.
Yeah, like, oh well, they talked about security guard. Like, you're the mayor, get the police down there. What is going on here? This is it's, I don't know. There's like an unwillingness to condemn criminality out of fear of being perceived as too hard. Like, we aren't willing to say addiction's bad and we should help people. We're like, well, who are we to say? We aren't saying that we need to stop crime. We're like, well, we should support the criminals to make them not criminals. Don't get me wrong, that's not altogether wrong.
Let's not cause the stigma. No stigma.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
The situation, like, so it's so bad.
They're more concerned about stigma. You dialed it right there. They're less concerned about stigma than they are, or more concerned about stigma than they are about violent crime and overdosing, which is why cities look the way they look right now. Troubling to see, certainly. It's interesting though. There's an investigation going on to this. One thing that absolutely shocks me though is hearing news articles, or hearing news sort of announcements, reading articles, whatever it may be, and you'll see like someone's busted in like a child trafficking ring, or engaged in human trafficking, or a violent drug dealer. They're like released with minor parole, or they have conditions. They get better treatment than Tamara Leach or some of the pastors in this country. And then the other thing too is if someone does like a burnout on a pride crosswalk, or drops off as our next story shares, anti-LGBTQS2 plus material, alphabet material in playgrounds. And don't get me wrong,
I stopped at Q and plus.
Yeah, they need to rebrand. But I'm not for dropping off sort of anybody materials on playgrounds. I don't think that's necessarily the place for it. But it is so interesting. I mean, they brand this as transphobic. I haven't seen the actual material itself. Someone described it as sort of transphobic, but they put more media attention and police attention into investigating this than they do churches being burnt down. And there's like a moral outrage and a call for action over a burnout in a crosswalk, or a little literature drop. Not that I'm agreeing with those things necessarily, but then they do like literal hate crimes and acts of arson. Am I crazy, or does that seem like backwards priorities?
No, there is so much hypocrisy in that area. In fact, I have a couple of reports coming up. On the last live stream, I discussed what it was like covering the protests, the counter protests and protests that were at the drag camp in Granville Island recently. So I have a report coming up with that. But what I learned since that is, even though there was only a small group, like I want to say 6 or 7 people, by the way, I would say 3 of which were part of the LGBTQ community opposing the drag camp, 2 of those individuals went back to their vehicles, which were not beside each other. They were separated with punctured tires. And so there were police everywhere. Obviously, there's cameras everywhere. I'm trying to figure out, I don't know if hopefully they've gotten back to me, but I'm trying to figure out what exactly they're doing. There was so much hype about how the people attending the drag camp and the workers at Carousel Theatre were at risk because of alleged threats of violence, which I confirmed with the VPD. They had no reports of such thing. But here you see 2 out of a handful of protesters against it actually have punctured tires, and they were punctured in a way that it's I guess it's the sidewall, which is the worst part to puncture a tire, so the damage is done. You can't repair that. So we see examples like that all the time. You know, people with Canadian flags getting paint thrown on them. I've seen that as well. And yeah, they are investigating one side of it so hard, and it's always hate. Well, at what point is it hate when you're getting targeted for your beliefs for having Canadian flags, which these 2 protesters also had on their car as well?
You see lots of the same things. It's interesting, and there's another one of these Muslim-led protests against sort of LGBTQ indoctrination. Now, speaking to these people over and over, they're very clear that this is just like, it isn't anti-LGBTQ. They want LGBTQ people protesting with them, and it's about sort of keeping school appropriate, respecting religious rights. And they're saying, listen, if my own kids decide this for themselves when they're older, when they're at the age of maturity, we'll respect them, but we just want to decide what's best for our children at this time. That's the core of this message. But what happens every time? The counter protesters arrive before the protest and park themselves where the protest is set to take place. They set up sort of black tarps, and they're blocking people out and pushing and shoving. But even with all that, the counter protesters will go somewhere else. The main protesters, like the Muslim-led group who are originally planning to be there, they don't cause conflicts. In fact, lots of the shoving that occurs is sort of borderline teens on both sides who are just kind of, I don't know, they're arguing and tussling. The adults tend to be generally respectful and separated despite all that. And we're going to have more on this tonight. I'm going to be speaking with the organizer of the protest. He was sort of asked not to attend this protest, and these are sort of tentative details I need to confirm, but this is what I'm being told. He was basically asked not to attend the protest tonight, and he's like, well, I've already told people I'm going. I'm going to go to this one, then maybe I won't go to other ones. This might be the last one we have for a while anyways. So the cops then went away, and they came back shortly later and charged him with criminal harassment. So they basically, it seems, and this is just what we're hearing now, it seems like they're like, are you not going to come back? Now, apparently this isn't from the events. It stems from an online argument with somebody, but they didn't mention it until... That's what we're hearing anyways. Those are the reports. So I'm going to be speaking with him tonight.
Well, let's get to the bottom of that. I don't know if you've seen this, which is also interesting, but I noticed a CTV article that came out, and sorry, I won't be able to find it fast enough to share it, but it's when it's not the Muslims that are protesting, you know, drag queen story time, automatically they're Nazis, they're fascists, they're extremists, that are bigots that are coming out. And then CTV does an article, and it was basically like, oh, Muslims, I think this was the headline, Muslims should think twice about protesting against LGBTQ plus stuff, because basically what the article is saying, that they're both oppressed. You're oppressed, so you're on the same team. And I thought, but you don't know any Christian and you oppose it, even though you are the most persecuted religion. We've got 80 plus churches being vandalized or burnt across the country, pastors thrown in jail. But if you're Christians, you're just a bigot. You're not oppressed. You're never hated.
No, and that's so true. Even the counter protesters, like when Christians protest something, they're like these fascist, Christo-fascist, F this, F that. It's brutal, and it's just like, let's punch these Nazis. The paragraphs written by the counter protesters that are like, oh, these are not representative of all Muslims, and it's very like political. Frankly, these Muslim counter protests, they're more direct, because I feel like they're less sort of self-conscious or afraid of being arrested, because they're one of the groups that tends to be safe from being continuously harassed by the government. They say things that are far more brash than I've seen at anything, whether it be Pastor Artur Pawlowski or Pastor Derek Reimer, any of those other things, those people who've been arrested. The conversations here are a lot more blunt, but they get this sort of soft glove treatment relatively compared to Christians. It's certainly incredibly interesting. On that note, We're going to jump to one more quick ad break. Then we're going to come back. We'll fly through our few remaining stories. And then we've got a chat or two. If you want to get a chat in, get it in right now so we can engage with it. Otherwise, it'll be too late. So if you want to share a Rumble rant, do so now. Ad break, a couple more stories, and then we'll wrap her up.
Living with spike protein in a post-pandemic world is something we all have to grapple with, whether you've had the virus, you've been vaccinated yourself, or if you're around those who were. The wellness company's Spike Support Formula is a daily supplement that can help you feel your best, and then stay that way. Go to twccanada.health to get back to that pre-pandemic feeling with Spike Support. Use coupon code REBEL to save 10% off these doctor-formulated products, which are rooted in science, and for a limited time, your first month's membership is only 99 cents. That's twccanada.health, coupon code REBEL at checkout. It's time to put your wellness back in the driver's seat.
Back. So yeah, the one of the stories I wanted to touch on, we've talked about this just about every week, but it is so interesting to see just the perpetual red maps, weather warnings, sweltering heat, this language that's so perpetual. And I don't know if you've had this experience though. You can look at sort of objective weather accounts and there's barely been an increase. We're talking like 0.7% in a long time. Sorry, 0.7 degrees over like a very long amount of time. That's probably a little below what we'd expect as far as a natural temperature cycle. So that aside, I don't know if you've seen that picture where there's a map from like 10 years ago and then a map today, and the temperatures are the same, but the map today is all red. Like heat warning. And I talk to people, I don't know if have you talked to people who are like, yeah, it's so much hotter these days.
Yes, I'm a little biased. Like, I feel like the last 2 days I was dying from the heat, but I know better. And it's also, you see this with like floods too. Whenever floods happen, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a new thing. It's climate change. But if you go back 50 years, it's like the exact same area had the exact same flood. And it's because you put property, you drained a lake and put property there. You know what I mean? And the earth is just trying to do what it wants to do. So it's the same kind of thing. People are, I think they play on the emotions of you feeling very hot. And then it's like, oh yeah, see, this is what we're talking about. This is what we've been sort of grooming you for this entire year, for this very moment. Yeah,
certainly. That troubling trend for sure. And it seems to be working, affecting people. Another sort of troubling media push was, and this is jumping back to COVID-19, but all the folks who were staying at home to save other people, well, they got awfully bored, and I guess they went out and adopted animals in record numbers to sort of entertain themselves. But now that they're told they don't have to stay home to save other people,
right. Yeah.
I'm not surprised to see that people who followed orders and went along with just about everything, they're just surrendering those animals, no problem. There is a pandemic pet surrender problem in Saskatoon, and some of these shelters are being absolutely overrun. Following a pandemic adoption boom, pets are now being turned back over to Saskatoon shelters, sanctuaries, and pounds at unprecedented rates. Shelters say they're dealing with an overwhelming amount of dog surrenders, according to the president of the Saskatoon SPCA. We have 500 more intakes year to date this year than the same time last year. 500 animals is a lot of animals. We've been able to adopt 500 animals out. In addition to that, we did to what they did normally last year. So they're kind of meeting the growth, but it's stressing. I personally just really wanted to share this as a jab against all those folks who stayed home and did all that sort of stuff. I am not at all surprised to learn that they're the type of people who abandon animals when things get hard, because they seem to just go the easy route, even if it's wrong.
And this has been a problem that's been happening like very noticeably since things started to return to some form of normalcy. I know that we did a report on it. I believe it was from Alberta as well, where we actually went down to one of the shelters and to see what's happening. So it's very sad, and it's not surprising. I mean, it's the wrong reason to get a puppy, and oh, it's so cute. Oh my gosh, now I'm gonna need another puppy. Don't tell my dog that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, it's good to shed light on it. Hopefully more people will go get those little guys.
Yeah.
We have
and finally,
Fraser McBurney again. Hi. Oh, am I? Oh, sorry. Well, go on, Adam. I'm so
You're
rude.
good. Our final story before we get to this chat here, Pfizer partners with trans advocacy organization while profiting from transition-related drugs. I think the word for that is conflict of interest. Pfizer's vast portfolio includes Depo-estradiol, a feminizing drug, aldactone, and Depo-provera, used to block male hormones, and Depo-testosterone and Cinerel, used for masculinizing effects and puberty blocking, respectively. I'm surprised I got all those out properly.
I was gonna say, I'm most impressed with you getting through that. Yeah, conflict of interest and Pfizer is hand in hand. That's what always happens. I mean, nothing surprises me anymore. It's such a booming business to capitalize on all of these things that are happening, and especially this industry. And I think that's a lot why we're seeing the push of it. I haven't read this full article yet. It says,
the gist of it is basically, Gendercool is celebrated by woke progressives for its advocacy work. Gendercool, what a name. Successfully getting its young ambassadors featured in prominent media outlets, including the New York Times and the Today Show. They also distribute books to young audiences aimed at celebrating, normalizing concepts of gender diversity. Though currently absent from Gendercool's list of sponsors, I wonder why Pfizer is featured on a document obtained by the Daily Wire detailing the different sponsorship levels. This arrangement involves an annual financial commitment ranging from $5,000 to $35,000. And returns companies receive several perks, including support for employees with trans and non-binary children and access to Gendercool events. Ultimately, though, what you have is a drug company supporting and endorsing an organization that is creating a supply for their own drugs, which I think we've seen that before in the last few years. But
it's literally nothing new at all, and it's that you always have to follow the money. If you're like, why is this happening? Follow the money, see why it's happening. And so, I mean, we've done many reports of similar nature, and it's good to keep reminding people about this. So,
And you know, the other thing that's absolutely wild is, and I think it might have been Joe Rogan who went off about this, but like these companies will intentionally, I'm not going to say they're intentionally putting out a drug that causes harm, but what they are doing is putting out a drug and then making $12 billion off of it, and then they get sued, and this has happened before, and then they pay like $3.5 billion in fines, which sounds like a lot of money. But if you do the math there, that's still profitable. That's so profitable. A troubling legacy. I think the crux of this here, though, is
maybe they'll come up with a way to be immune from that in the first place. Like, you know, with COVID, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on YouTube, but with a certain type of injury.
Yes, a certain type of injury. So nothing new. I for one, I just miss the days when like conservatives were kind of passive about big pharma, and then the liberals and the leftists, that was their sort of moral responsibility. They were like, no, we need to do preventive medicine, and we need to make sure that big pharma is held to account. As soon as COVID hit, that flipped, and they became the advocates for big pharma. So the one thing they were doing right, they got wrong. So hopefully, eventually, maybe when Trudeau's no longer leader, they'll wake up and come to their senses. We shall see. We have one Rumble rant on the day from Fraser McBurney. As always, all in caps. He gives $5. Says we are having our Hamilton Freedom Movement potluck picnic this Sunday. That was canceled last Sunday because of rain. I'll be serving homemade French fries. Let's have fun. 12 noon. Wonderful. I wish I could make it and have some of those franchise. I'm not sure if we have folks coming down. I know sometimes Efron gets out to those. But we shall see. Any final thoughts for the folks, Drea?
No, it was a good show, jam-packed, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, awesome. Hopefully, if you guys haven't come down, Drea, I know you're going to start driving right away so you can make it in time for Stampede. If you guys are down at the Stampede grounds, we're going to be at these pancake breakfasts. I'll be down at the Stampede grounds. We are accredited as media, so I'm going to be covering a number of events there. Looking forward to see you. Don't be shy. Come say hey. We might even be able to do an interview with you. And as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I want to thank our folks in Toronto for doing incredible work and making this possible, making us look good. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos.
Let me ask you a question. I remember when the CBC sued the Conservative Party of Canada. And if I recall, it was Andrew Scheer who was the leader at the time. And he still went on CBC shows.
Yeah.
And I thought, have you no self-respect? They're suing you and you're going on the show. So let me ask you, Premier Smith. The CBC lied about you for 6 months. a wicked lie that did great damage to the reputation of prosecutors in Alberta. Claimed that they were corrupt in some way. Yeah. They aimed for you. They also had collateral damage in the Justice Department. Do you think you should still deal with the CBC as a news agency, or do you think you should deal with them as a kind of Trudeau super PAC?
Well, they certainly smeared everyone. They smeared me. They smeared all my office staff. They smeared the Independent Public Service. They smeared the Crown prosecutors. And they gave ammunition to my opponents to smear me some more. I mean, the NDP should also apologize, because the NDP also
went on. Are you still going to do sit-downs with the CBC? Like they came to kill you.
I'll have to talk to my team about that.
Yeah, I mean...
You know what I've done? I will take their questions in a mediated forum, because I do a lot of press conferences, and I think that's fair, because I want to be the